corporate structures, but really putting the family and the strategy and what's their values and what's their vision and what's their strategy at the core. So we are across 14 geographies and also over 20 offices. So next slide. So just bringing back to how we do it is that we share practical wisdom. So the wonderful thing of working with so many families is you get to learn something from other families every day. And then you take that into your next conversation with another family that you work with. So when I work with some families in SA or then in Namibia or in Ghana or in Kenya and Cameroon, you share all those learnings. And then, of course, also globally, you get to bring different ideas and unique perspectives. We also work alongside advisors. We really enjoy working with families, advisors that they trust. So not having to be the end all and be all. And then also facilitating those hard family conversations. Sometimes it's a lot easier to bring in an independent and objective party because they're not getting anything from it. So other than bringing the family together, it's not like they are there with the agenda to be the head of the family business or inherit something, or we're really just there to facilitate. So that's just a quick bit about our company. On the next slide, of course, just always bringing it back to the role family businesses and family enterprises play. And, especially in South Africa, we have a close to 50% job unemployment rate. So creating jobs and creating employment is incredibly important. And that's why we have to focus on families and family businesses and asking the question, where does the next entrepreneur come from? And, creating that entrepreneurial spirit and making sure that the platform continues in families. They obviously also count for more than 70% of global GDP, as you all know. And they also survived COVID above all other companies. They did better, they stood together, they lived their values. Okay, so the next slide. Why are we having this conversation? And why are we debating the topic? Is because there are certain risks when it comes to families. And usually when we ask families what they're worried about, and they focus on the investment risks or the political risk or economic risk, what's going on in the world and with the industries. And of course, all those things are really, really important. But what they sometimes forget is that poor communication and toxic family dynamics can destroy their business, can destroy their wealth more than any of those other indicators at play. And also, of course, to prepare the next gen. Because who takes this all forward and who needs to buy into the vision and into the values and put in those long hours. It's going to be the next thing going forward. So that's why when we come back to the question, who plays the major role, by the end of the session, hopefully you'll have a clearer understanding or answer, albeit that it actually is both and very complex and actually more role players than only those two. But that communication remains the number one. So in the next slide, if you think about communication and where you are now, it also depends, are you going from Gen 1 to Gen 2? Is it Gen 2 to Gen 3? Is it Gen 5 to Gen 6? Because every time with succession, it differs. It's not like because you got it right from Gen 1 to Gen 2, it means automatically that from Gen 2 to Gen 3, it will be plain sailing. And you've done this before, so you got the recipe and it will be easy. just because you're working with different personalities, different people, they have different experiences, different interests, different expectations. The world looks differently during every generation. If you think your parents, how they were brought up and what was important to them and what were some of the major role players and businesses and what was going on in the economy, and some of them, were born in the wars or whichever period, and where we are now, it's drastically different. And then if you look at the children and your children now, what they are faced with, and with cyberbullying being a very key major effect on children at the moment, it's just vast differences. So every time you have to adapt and keep on communicating and know which questions to ask. So, for instance, does your family share vision for the family wealth and the way forward? Now, is that a question the current gen need to answer, or the next gen? Or do they need to do it together? How is family leadership determined? Does that come from the current gen, or is there actually one of the next gen who need to put up their hand and say, I'm willing to do this. I'm willing to put in the long hours for the family, and take all of this forward together. Now, what values do you want to instill in the future gen, or in the next gen? And that is very important, but you need to know what are those values that you're living, and do it intentionally and take that forward intentionally. And then again, get the next gen to also believe that they also want to live those values. So communication between the different generations are extremely important. So on the next slide, I'm going to use a couple of models. So this is one of the key models that Stonehage Fleming uses. It's the 4 pillars of capital. And I'm going to do a deep dive in each of these capitals. And you've heard Tsitsi also speak about the capitals. We have a different twist on it. But we believe that there should be a key role player and a key person focusing on each pillar of these capitals. And that majority of the time, everybody focuses on the financial capital, which is the wealth and the businesses, but they don't focus on the intellectual capital, sometimes human capital, the social capital, cultural capital. Some families bring in the religion, and that's one of their capitals. And who takes that forward? Like, the one person can't do all of it, or they'll give more attention to one of the capitals than the others. And of course, the foundation of it all being, what's the purpose? What's the purpose for the family? What's the purpose for the business? And do you share that purpose? Because many families I've worked with, I ask them, but what is this for? What is the purpose of the wealth? You've generated all this wealth, which is amazing, and it's tremendous. But what is it ultimately for? Majority of the time, they can tell me who it's for, but they can't tell me what it's for. Is it because they want the next 5 generations to be able to study or have opportunity for education? Is it the opportunity to create more businesses and, flip that name family business around to a business family, where you have a holding company with a lot of different businesses below it, managed by family members or created by family members? What is that purpose? Or is it to help the community and be there for the community, which is, of course, very important. And family businesses, they do that naturally. You don't even have to, with all of the ESG policies coming in and making sure that companies do good and, give back. For family businesses, they've been doing it their whole lives. They don't know anything else, because they know if the community benefit, they benefit, and their businesses benefit, and their people benefit. And that's a major competitive advantage. So what's the purpose? Number one, And then the question is, who creates that purpose? Is it the founder? Is it the next gen? And of course, when I work with families, the next gen always wants to know, what was this created for? And sometimes they ask the question too late. So I really encourage next gens to ask a lot of questions, prompt their parents. Then if we go into the different pillars, financial capital, of course, being the wealth, who takes those structures forward? Again, the founders, they created it, and they've built it and made it very successful. But at some stage, the founders become risk averse, their energy taper off, and they're not willing to go that extra mile anymore, but they still have incredible knowledge and experience and networks and a wealth that they bring, but they need the next gen to take it to the next level and to take it forward and run with it and believe in the business. Even if the business looks a bit different, the next gen actually need to put up their hand and run with it. So the next one is the intellectual capital. So intellectual capital being not reinventing the wheel. When I work with families, it's always incredible when I ask the children, okay, so when were you exposed to the business? And I get different answers, but for most of them, they're like, no, I've been working in the business, or had exposure to the business from 3 years old, 5, 6, 7 years old. And you can just imagine if you have that leap ahead of anybody else, that you've almost had training 18, 20 years more training than any non-family member in the business, just by learning through what you've seen and what you've been exposed to over so many years. You can just think that creates a massive competitive edge and pride and heritage in certain businesses, and knowledge, of course. But then the parents should be willing to share that knowledge, because I've also seen the other side of it, where parents or founders or business owners have kept their children out of the businesses, or kept them away from the wealth, or kept them away from the structures, not allowing them to learn, because on one hand they said they don't want to burden them, or they don't want to put pressure on them, or make them think they have to do this, have to be in the business, or have to play a major role, where at the end of the day, the next gen, they have to take it forward. And ultimately, they will inherit, or they will become a trustee if there's a trust structure, or they'll become a shareholder if there's shares, because they'll inherit. So how do you become a responsible owner if you don't know how it works, or you've never been exposed to it? So intellectual capital being very, very important. And then social capital. How do we show up in the community? What's our brand? What's our reputation? How do we engage with our employees, with whoever we give back to? And that's also just the world out there. Nowadays, you actually talking to the whole world every day. Or if you post something, how many people, thousands of people can see it. So it's not just actually in your communities anymore. And then the cultural capital is, how do you keep it together with your values and your perspectives, and how you do things as a family. So again, as I mentioned, all of these capitals are extremely important in a family, in family enterprises. And with the top, without the roof, you need your roof, is the communication. And who communicates? And again, there I will challenge anyone who tells me only the founders. The next gen, you can also ask questions, and you have to be willing to learn. You have to be willing to put up your hand and say, okay, let's go for this. Let's build it. Because it takes courage, and it takes a lot of hard work. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to go to a bit more detail. So obviously you're starting with defining who family is. So that is also a question I always ask the founders and the next gen is, how do you define family? Some families, they include adopted children, foster children, stepchildren. Some families view spouses as part of the family, same as they get treated the same way as bloodline. And then you get the opposite. Some families that only stick to bloodline and say everything will always only go to bloodline, or only go to the oldest son, or only go to, but you have to define that as a family and talk through it as a family. And don't think everybody is on the same page or have the same view. So coming back to communication, and you plays a major role. Both you need to speak about this as a family and ask the questions as a family. And then moving into the history and the legacy, that of course comes from the founders and is something you can be very proud of. Sometimes you also learn what not to do from your parents, and how not to treat certain things or people or certain situations, which is, again, it's a privilege to learn and be open to learning, and also learn about yourself. Like, what are some of the things you can't do as a next gen, or that's not some of your strengths, and we need to pull other people into a business or into conversations to take that forward. What's the values? So the parents, obviously, they instill values in you from a young age, and the founders. But you, as the next gen, you have to take that forward, and you have to instill that into the next gen again, for that succession to go forward, and for it to also to play out into the family wealth, family enterprise, and family business. Then the question around what do you want to achieve, what's the goals you want to achieve as a business and as a family. It doesn't help the founders write a whole list of what they want to achieve, but there's no buy-in from the next gen. And the next gen, it's like, that's not the direction we want to go in. We believe in XYZ, or we believe in, some of the families have certain no-go investments, what they would never want to be in certain industries. And if that is how what the next gen's view is and how they feel, you have to listen to them and take that on board. Then also the expectations. So speaking about expectations in the business, expectations of the wealth, it can be sometimes a difficult conversation. I remember was it 2017, I asked my father that I wanted to see the will, and I wanted to understand what happens to my sister on their passing, because I have a mentally handicapped sister who looks after, and etc. And of course, it was a no-go conversation, and they were really angry with me that I asked these questions. But I mean, if I didn't ask those questions then, my dad passed away unexpectedly, got very sick, and within a week, we lost him. I wouldn't have known what to do next and what the expectations were, and pulling those tough conversations forward, as Dennis mentioned. I'm really passionate about it, and that there's no regrets, that you know what your parents want, what your aunts and your uncles want, and what it looks like going forward. So under the financial capital, with the ownership model, I've seen many times where ownership models and structures are put into place, and they were fit for purpose then. But when the next gen comes in, that you change the structure, to change where the world is now, or how the business grown, or maybe going to different geographies, and those models need to adjust the whole time. And again, the next gen, they drive that. I also ask questions around sentimental assets. So what do you see as a family are some of those sentimental assets? And I get the parents who say nothing is sentimental. You get the family members who say all of the assets are sentimental. But again, pulling those conversations forward and asking the questions as a family, It's very important. Same with the distribution policy or dividend policies within family businesses and family enterprises. When do you start distributing the wealth? When do you start, and what does that look like, and what should it be for? You need to talk about that as a family and understand majority of the time a big part of it should remain in the family, in the family business, in the enterprise to keep on growing. Because as the family tree grows and the mouths that you need to feed grows, obviously you can't just pull money out of the business. The business needs to grow as well, and there needs to be more businesses needs to be created and brought into the. That's why I said that the business family becomes really important, because everybody has different talents and different things that they're good at, but there's a space for everyone in the structure. So then as a family, again, what's your wealth strategy? Is it as a family we only stick to the family business, we only stick to the core, we only stick to what we're good at, and we'll get to the different next gen parts and what they follow. But again, you need to communicate, because if nobody wants to take the business forward and there's no drive and passion for the business, then it's sometimes better to sell it and use the funding of that business for the next gen to start a new business in an industry that they're passionate about and that they believe in and that they want to take forward. So in family business governance and in succession planning, this constant narrative between the founders and the children, and continuously, so not just the once off, or is really important to make sure it's successful. Then under intellectual capital, educating the next gen. So what are those stories that you're telling from a very young age? Are you making them proud of the business and of how the wealth was created and where it comes from and where it came from and what it's for? And do they believe in those stories? Because storytelling is really, really powerful. And of course, if you built it, you believe in it. So what are those messages that you're telling the next gen? So there the founder plays a very big role. And then, as I mentioned, the next gen to take that forward. And then how are they educated and how are they brought into the business? So you first have to go work for other business to gain experience outside and learn how not to do things or just how to learn how to work for a boss. And that some things or some governance structures that put into place, that it's not because it's against you, but it's just best practice and what's the best for the business and keeping the business growing and thriving. Or can you come into the business immediately from after school, or even not go to school, or just how do you discuss employment as a business? And that can also be taking the wealth structures forward and taking responsibility for the wealth structures. Who educates you on it? How investments work? And do you sit in on those trustee meetings or those board meetings or shareholders meetings? And how often do you share information and with whom? And is it confidential? And who may you share it with? And then the big trigger is conversations around spouses. And I don't think families speak about the spouses often enough and the role that they play. That's why I said it becomes complex, because of course your spouse plays a massive role on the bloodline, and they are 50% of the next gen, and also the gens taking it forward. So the values that they bring to the table, the conversations, the interests, the expectations, their views, their experiences, they have a really big role to play, and they can influence a next gen, whether going from I'm going to take this business forward and lead it to, we're moving abroad, or moving to other city or other country and not being part of the business anymore. So you have to bring them into the conversation, at least get the bloodlines view of what the spouses think, and how they work in the business, may they be in one of the committees, for instance, of the family council, may they attend the family days, etc. So a lot around the intellectual capital, who takes it forward, and the role you play. Then if we get to the social capital and the role the social capital plays, again, founders, very important. The one family I've worked with, when they did a study, they saw that 60-70% of the employees, because it's a farming business, actually they grew up on the farm and they put them through school. So because the business pays for education and send the children of the employees to school, and that all of the 70% of the employees were educated through this family school, which is amazing to see the impact that they had on the community, and that had a direct impact on who they could actually employ in the business. But what is that philanthropic feel of your family and of the family business, and how do you give back to the community, to the employees? What's your mandate? Who runs that? There's a major role to play in the family. And so do you focus on education or on medical, or do you focus on the less fortunate? And so many things you can focus on, but do you discuss it as a family? Same with traditions. Some families have very strong traditions that are very important and forms part of their DNA, and who takes that forward? Again, you learn it from your parents and the founders, but the next gen, again, they need to take that forward. Then when it comes to conflict, because there are 3 certainties in life. One is you're going to pass on one day, the other one, you're going to pay tax, and the third one is that there's going to be conflict in a family business, in a family enterprise, or just between family members. That's just part of life. And how do you deal with the conflict? What's the example your parents set or the founders set? How did they deal with conflict? And again, sometimes when I work with families, they say, we've learned what not to do. That's sometimes certain ways of dealing with conflict, what not to do. But you have to open that conversations and be open to learning and growing, and saying you're sorry, and saying that, okay, maybe I made a mistake here. We also talk a lot about social media within the social capital, and because it's such a big part of our lives nowadays, the founders need to set a tone with regards when it comes to social media, and the world, on what do we post, what don't we post. We've seen quite a couple of abductions because children post and check in everywhere where they go, and then they become targets. So how do you educate and parent the next gen, the younger gen? And are there certain things your family and the family business and family enterprise will never talk about or never put on social media? That's also very important to talk about and be on the same page. And because that has a direct impact on your reputation as a family and as a business. So you can hear there's a lot of conversations to be had, and that it's really a conversation between the founder and the next gen. And that it's a continuous conversation. Maybe if we go to the next slide. If I just quickly touch on the 3D model, because I'm sure you've all seen it before. If you look at the ownership structure, so of course, starting with the founder and the sole owner, that willingness to hand over and pass the baton is, of course, the biggest one in successful family governance succession. And but then also the next gen, to the willingness to take it from them and run with it. And then if you look at the governance structure, the owner started the business. Obviously, they had a passion for certain industry, and saw a gap in the market. But when it becomes a family managed business, of course, that's a different ball game and different dynamics at play. And it's a different thinking pattern about, am I actually willing to come and work with my sister or my cousin or my uncle or my aunt? Because everything, it comes down to decisions. So you can decide, no, I'd rather go and work somewhere else in a different country for a different business. It's not necessarily that you have to take the business forward or have to work in the business. But if you do, then you have to know what it means. So very important for the next gen when they make that decision. And I've also worked with next gens where they feel they have to, but it's not their passion and they're not happy and they actually feel incredible burden working in the family enterprise. And I can tell you that's not what your parents want. Or even if you get that subtle pressure from your parents, the day when they pass, you can just walk away from the business again. So I always tell the family, rather have an open conversation about it, get someone who's really passionate about it and want to work there to take it forward, and put this person in a different role, because there are so many different roles in family structures, in family governance structures. If I can just quickly touch on different family council committees that there are, if you focus on, the one is focusing on investments and the wealth strategy, the one is focusing on socials, on education, on mentorship, on conflict resolution, on entrepreneurial days or innovation clubs within the family business, on there's so many different, on the philanthropy, of course, and reputation, and so many different roles you can play that if you do not want to be in the family business, you really shouldn't. And then again, in the investment structure, talking about where do you want to go? What's your strategy as a family? Where do you want to be in the next 20 years? And that really comes down to the founder and the next gen having the conversation together. We can just go past the next slide and then just touch on the 4L model. So I really love the 4L model when it comes to NextGens and the founders, because you start with learning business. And again, it will be the willingness to learn about the business, the willingness to be open, because I've never heard any NextGen say what they've learned in the business, even if they didn't go work there, they didn't make use of it in other businesses or wherever they found themselves. Because if you're open to learning and to growing, you'll definitely be able to apply it somewhere. So the first thing is learning business. That can be from the age of 5 years old, being open to share all the learnings with your children, taking them to work, showing them what you do, what you think, how you get to certain strategies, and then learning our business. So if you have a family business or wealth structure, learning about that, very important. And then, of course, you have to move into learning to lead our business or our enterprise and just how to take it forward. And then learning to let go. So you can see learning to let go, that is when you have to pass the baton to the next gen. Because again, there I've also seen where some families skip a generation because they're not willing to let go. And willing to let go doesn't necessarily mean you have to retire at the age of 60, go and sit at the beach, not be involved at all. It's just changing your role, letting space and bringing the next gen in, making them being able to also bring in their strategy and their ideas and their views and their thinking. And then if I just quickly focus on the next gen and the different paths they follow. So on the next slide. We've seen these are some of the major paths for the next gens. So either being a steward, so taking the business, the family business or the family wealth as it is, obviously protecting it, making sure it remains profitable, and sustainable. So that's the one path. The other one is setting up their own venture within the family business, with financial and family backing. So we call that entrepreneurs. Then, of course, the other one path is transformers. And here the founders really allow the next gen to come in and change everything, give the business a whole facelift from where it was. Then you got entrepreneurs. That is when the next gen build their own business. So it's separate from the family firm. Or they, of course, follow their own career, their own passion outside the family business, away from the family. And we've seen some next gens also flop between these different paths, not necessarily only following one path. So when the next gens have to decide whether we want to succeed and take this business forward, or the structure forward, they're asking themselves a lot of questions. If you go to the next slide, because it is difficult. It's a difficult decision. It's lifelong. It's not necessarily that if you make the decision, you have to stick to that decision for the next 40, 50 years. But it is the added pressure. And it is a difficult conversation and decision to make. So they ask, how do I communicate well with the next gen and with the current gen? Can we discuss issues? Will I be able to have an impact in the business? Can I bring my own values and my own thinking and my own goals? Will the organization respect me for the role that I'm playing? Will I be able to have my own independence and freedom, or will I always be seen as, the next gen, and in the shadows? Will my spouse or my partner support me? Will they also, take this business with me? Because there's a lot of sacrifices that you have to make. And, are we in this together? Especially when it gets tough and challenging. And will I be able to live up to the senior generation's expectations and their view of me? So again, there's a lot of things going on for the next gen to be able to take a business forward. And it's not so straightforward. So when I come back to the question around who plays the major role, I'm sure you can take three things away. The one being that it's complex, that there's more than two role players, but that it's both next gen and the founding generation, and that it's all based on communication and constant communication going forward. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you, Andrea. So Andrea has ended with an answer to the question. So the question was to have a fruitful webinar, fruitful discussion around the relationship between the next generation and then the incumbent family business leaders. Thank you very much. My key takeaways is that the cultural capital is something that is fresh in my ideas. So pay more attention to the cultural capital in all the capitals that we know, the societal capital, social capital, and the intellectual capital, spiritual capital, and all the other capitals that you can think of. So the cultural capital, something new that you dive deeper and to understand more. Andrea also said it is time for you to initiate difficult or tough conversations. That may be your breakthrough in your family business. Having or getting answers to your questions is the way to have fruitful communication in your family business. The last part is three things that are certain in a family business: death, taxes, and conflicts. So you should have a way to deal with these things. Thank you very much for the lessons that you have shared. My question, we have a couple of questions in the chat box. My question is, in the developmental model, you move from the owner manager, then it goes to, say, sibling partnerships, or it goes to cousin consortium. So as the years go by, as the generations come in, it becomes more complex. My question is, which is more challenging when it comes to communication? First to second, second to third, or third to fourth, and even fourth to fifth? Because at the Family Business Summit, we've hosted first generation, second generation, third generation, and even fourth generation. So communication in these incremental generations will help a lot of the participants online. So kindly help us answer the question, which is more challenging?
I think my answer is always it depends. It depends when you started having the conversation. If the founders had clear values and goals installed into the next gen or the second gen, and they believe it and they're taking it forward, and they believe and they take it forward to the third gen, some of those conversations can be easier. But if there's nothing and you need to start from scratch, of course, as the generations goes on, there's more voices in the room, there's more role players, there's more interest in expectations, and so it will definitely become more difficult if there hasn't been anything in place.
No place at all. Okay. All right. So the earlier the better. You start early, it becomes
Yes.
difficult. It becomes easy. When it is difficult from the beginning, it becomes easy as the years go by. Yeah. Thank you. I had a question on how to communicate purpose, but I think I got some information from the 4L model. Thank you very much. Let's go to the chat box from Professor Pierre. He says, how easily do you bring together both founders and next generation to discuss about these topics of governance and or succession? Does it come from them or from consultants? You mentioned that bringing in some outside help, but where does it come from when it comes to bringing these people together?
I must say, I've seen many a times it comes from the next gen, that they push their parents or the founders, or that, like, how do we deal with this? What are these answers? And many a times the founders, they can't answer, and then they get outside help. I've also seen the founders say, sure, I'm struggling to know who to bring in, how to bring them in, how to start the conversation with the next gen, and then they bring in. So I've seen both sides. But in my recent conversations, it's been more the next gen pushing the question.
Hmm. In terms of the business or the whole enterprise?
The whole enterprise.
Okay. Okay.
Just because the next gen are being educated more.
Okay.
So they go study in the UK or in the US, and obviously with the wealth of knowledge and information that we have at our fingertips nowadays, all those questions get raised by the next gen, and then they ask their parents, and like, sure, okay, the parents sometimes they don't know because it is difficult conversations and it's difficult topics.
And and even now it's Asia. So you also have some family business next generation schooling in the Asian region. And these are different cultures. What's your experience when it comes to the African culture's interference in all the succession and then governance?
It also depends where in Africa. It's very different east from west and to the south.
Yeah.
There's a lot of traditions that I've seen um, that comes into play. A lot of respect for the elders. A lot of the spiritual capital that comes in, that you need to obviously, you don't want to disrespect your parents or the elders. But we usually work with that. still try to, make sure they communicate and get their message across in a respectful manner.
I was in a meeting of Next Generation, about 30 Next Generation, and we asked this question: how is the communication between these two? And one of them said that they just listen to what the older people have to say, then that's all. And it has brought peace and harmony in the family business. And that was interesting to hear Next Generation say, we just listen. Just give us command and we go our way. So it's very interesting. And this is Africa.
Yeah.
So sometimes having an expressive culture than obey culture, having the two sides at play and understanding them really helps us. Yeah, thank you. Right. So let's go to the next question. With the issue of successor, should the founders prioritize merits or family ties when selecting?
Also a very interesting question I get a lot. You have to ask yourself the question, what is, at the end of the day, what is the best for the business? So it's always about balance. So if you bring in someone with family ties, of course they'll bring in the values and they'll bring in the culture and all of that heritage and commitment. But if they're not the best person for the role with the best experience and the best education, it can only take the business as far. So I've also seen where families make the decision that lower levels, family, they're always welcome, but the top levels, the board and the CEO, you have to have the best person in the role because it can make or break a business. So they have seen the prioritizing merit.
So is it advisable to maybe start from a point, because the family business may be the only training grounds, and it can even be their leadership development model, where you start from a lower
level
position, then you build your capacity, because your family business may be the only avenue you would want to train in. But the challenge also comes in when the next generation thinks that this is my father's business, this is my mom's business, this is my auntie's business, this is my uncle's business, and they get the entitlement mentality, and it becomes very challenging.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's go to the next. He said, when it comes to sentimental assets, which is a new thing I have heard, whose perspective should carry more weight, the founders who acquired them or the next generation who inherits them?
That's a very interesting and good question. I would again say both. But where it is important, I think you respect the founders during their lifetime, definitely respect their views, but that you as the next gen have to talk about or have a view about which assets you sell and which ones you keep. And if you keep certain assets, who maintains them, because a lot of the times I've seen families, they have holiday houses or farms, or there's a lot of cost and responsibility and looking after that asset. And are you all willing to play that role, to look after it and pay for it and continue all the expenses? So the next gen should be on the same page, 100%, between the siblings or the cousins. But while the founders are alive, you have to respect their wishes. When it's businesses, when it comes to businesses, and the business, of course, can also be a very big sentimental asset because it's part of their identity and who they are. I've also seen difficult for families to sell businesses or change the business because it's so sentimental, but it doesn't make money anymore. And that's also difficult conversations to have.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you. So the last question here is, how do founders strike a balance between maintaining control and giving autonomy to the next generation during succession?
I've seen, so succession can take between 5 and 10 years. It's not overnight. It doesn't happen overnight. And they slowly start to relinquish control. It's also, you're not going to get the business from one board meeting to the next. They maybe start attending only board meetings, so 4 meetings a year. And there they still do the checks and balances and ask the difficult questions. I've also seen where for family businesses, and when they flip it to business family, when they say, okay, this is we back you with financial, we give you financial backing to run the business and start the business, and then they have complete autonomy. But if that business then don't succeed, it's not like they're going to get 4, 5, 6, 7 times to do that. It's going to be we give you this opportunity, but then you really need to show yourself. But in majority of the time, it happens slowly, and not immediately, and can take up to 5 years.
It's not just at a go, something just happens like an event, but it's a process.
Yes, it's a process.
Thank you. So we have a question from Dr. Isaac Japan. Says the decision by founders of business to hand over, what critical factors should inform who takes over from the next generation pioneers? What critical factors?
I would say passion and ability.
Okay.
And then also that willingness to take that baton forward, because it's a huge responsibility and a lot of pressure to take the business forward, and because you do it for the family. And majority people I've spoken to, is they say it's not like you do it for the money. You do it for the purpose. You do it for the family. You do it for all those other reasons. That's not just financial. So, and for all those other capitals, because you want to give back to the community and to your family, and all the knowledge that's instilled to you, take that forward. So willingness, passion, and living the values and being aligned with the goals is very important.
In other words, having the heart to do this because of the family dynamics and the challenges that may arise due to love, due to money, due to power. So in a family business, it's not easy to lead the family business because you are capable. Maybe you've done it in other corporations, but when it comes to a family business, it's another ball game altogether. So thank you, Andrea, for touching on those points. Thank you, Dr. Japon, for bringing that in. The last one from Cyril says, many NextGens in Africa are educated abroad and return with new ideas. How should governance structures manage the tension between foreign perspectives and local realities?
That is a very, very difficult one. I've seen that play out in many family businesses.
So interestingly, the team is thinking of doing this as a theme for AFBS 2026.
It's a very, very conversation.
It's a big one.
There is a lot of tension when you bring in those new ideas. I would usually say back it with, if there's something that you have to get them to understand. Why do you think this is a good idea? Why will this enhance the business? Why will this? So bringing a lot of research and information and just proper backing of your view of why you think it's better. But the founders have to have a growth mentality mentality and an open mindset. Otherwise, you're not going to get very far. So there, I must say that the role is the founding generation or the current gen.
And communication, knowing when to say
when to
something.
say and bring it in.
Very important. In this part of the world, you have to be careful when you say it.
Exactly.
Sometimes.
How you say it.
Yeah, and how you say it. Thank you very much, Andrea, and it's a pleasure to have you. A lot of lessons learned today. We appreciate your time. So the audience, thank you very much. So today, interestingly, we had a global representation. Participants from South Africa, Mauritius, Poland, USA, UK, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Togo, Kenya, Uganda, India, and Ghana. So this is a global participation. Thank you very much for coming. And keep the space open. The next webinar, October. So this webinar was to be in August, and we did it today. That's September. So next month, we'll have another webinar, an insightful webinar. For your information, we'll share the slides to all the registrants and participants. And please follow Africa Family Business Summit on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube X. If you have not participated in the Family Business Summit before, we will say next year, let's host you and keep observe the space. We shall send you more information about Africa Family Business Summit 2026. Thank you for coming and see October. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you
you for
all.
having me. Love the conversation. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.